B.K.S. Iyengar says that yoga is a science and an art. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, it's such a interesting, certainly when we look at his practice, we can see that he approaches it like a scientist, he approaches it like an artist. And meaning that there's this precision that, the scientific method, the sort of empirical process of you do something and you observe its effect and you watch it in the short term and over a long time and you look at all the different variables that might be affecting how something, what's manifest. But then the art piece is that aesthetic experience, which I think is so important in the yoga process, because beauty is often where we come into meaning and in touch with the divine in some way, and it's cultivating that ability to see, to have an aesthetic experience and beauty and appreciate form and appreciate content and appreciate things as they are, is something we learn when we watch art, when we look at art. And so he's really bringing those two together, which I think I come from a family of scientists, so I don't think that scientists are not, I would say that they are not artistic. That very often they'll approach their science with a certain deep and profound appreciation for life and for meaning and for the mystery. And similarly, that artists will have a high degree of attention and precision and that they bring to their expression. So he definitely brought those together in a really amazing way. At least that's my interpretation.
You just made me think about, my sister is an artist, and I look at her, and when she's drawing an art form, she's drawing a beautiful body, she's also a scientist.
Yes.
And I think that, there really is not a separation. It's really the beauty of art, the beauty of science. It all really comes from that mystical place and that magical place.
Yeah, and the seeing, it's like there's something about that, scientists are really looking, and artists are really looking, and yoga is about perception, very much about how we perceive. So I remember my mother, who was a biologist, and there were some spider, I don't know what type of spider, had spun a web outside the awning of our house in New Mexico, and I knew that she had been watching this spider and the spider's web because the spider built the web and then she laid these eggs or whatever. There was some whole thing that my mother was observing, because as a scientist, she was always watching nature and just letting it unfold. And there was this, a deep connection with the subject that she was observing. In a certain sense, she's becoming that in a certain way, so absorbed. Like we are with yoga, with our object of attention, there's a high degree of absorption where you lose yourself in a good way. And my dad just saw this spider web and took a broom and knocked it down. And I have never, my parents fought. The worst fight that I ever observed as a child was over that.
The spider web?
Yes, because for her it was something. It was not just a spider web, It was, and the spider was not a lesser creature. So there was such a teaching in that, and it was really to see, just to observe. And my dad didn't know, so it was like they had different perspective, different perception of what that was and the meaning of it. But yoga, there's something so wonderful, and I think that there's yoga in so many. That was like a type of yoga when you have this high degree of seeing, of perceiving, and appreciating, and connecting to what you're observing.
And paying attention.
paying attention with reverence, you know, that is just, it's just like a spider, but who's to say? So.
I feel that as a student, you know, taking a class with you, that you really take that individually to all the students, that you're teaching from a place of reverence for, you have the precision and you have, you know, the science behind what you're teaching, and you're bringing us into understanding our physical body, but then you're making it almost feels like it's a dance. You're kind of inviting us to dance along with you, along your journey and along your path, as a scientist, but very much as an artist. And as a student, it's just really beautiful to be a part of that.
Well, thank you. And have a background in dance, so that's wonderful that it somehow is coming out.
You're expressing it.
Well, it was a real, you know, but definitely a joy and deep joy in my life, and is always in my heart. So, you know, it's.
Well, in this kind of practice, you know, Iyengar Yoga has this reputation of being so rigorous and so, you know, linear.
Yes.
And you bring a different perspective into this. Yes, it's not that we're playing around and not working, but there's a sense of joy within the limitations. You know, if you notice somebody's out of alignment or something like that, you bring us back to that present moment. And tell us a little bit about what you think about where, you know, if yoga is really supposed to bring out lightness in us, why is it that sometimes it can be so dark, where, you know, the rigorous aspect of it, of the seriousness of this practice, that can take us away from really the joy, if for lack of a better word, of samadhi. I mean, if we're really seeking samadhi, why are we so much in the dark?
Yeah, well, when the way that you phrase that, I'm thinking about the second practice sutra. We worked with that a little bit today. Satu dirga kala nairantarya satkara sevito dridhabhumihi. So the long practice, the long uninterrupted practice, done with devotion. So if you were going to practice for a long time, and we are not experiencing joy, it's going to be hard to keep it up, and it's going to be hard to be consistent. And I think that if we just look at Guruji as an example, that he stayed interested and curious and fresh, like into, you know, right up to the end, till the very end. And so there has to be, for me anyway, you know, a joy, a deep joy, and I guess the practice is like a refuge in a certain way, because life is serious. Life is, but also I think that if we can balance, and this is something I thought a lot about because of just my own personal history, but if we can balance precision and play, because play can do wonderful things for our brain, and it can, and we learn to not take ourselves too seriously, and it gives us a certain perspective, and it helps us shift our perspective so that we're not, so that our mind doesn't become narrow and closed and our breath shallow. And there's just something so wonderful about not seeing those two as opposites, but trying to bring them together, like any really good, you know, good game is like that, right? There is a form and there is precision and it holds your attention, but there's a lightheartedness, because otherwise life, you know, that I think that's a tool that we can actually take into life. Mm-hmm. Like for me, when something's really challenging, one of the things that I've played with is saying, how can I play with this? And that makes me able, or that enables me to engage with the difficulty, whereas before I would be in aversion. And but the play is an invitation, and it's not that it's like completely frivolous or anything. There's definitely, it's again not an either or. It's and. It's and so and maybe with the practice, the seriousness could be that just life is fluid, and we don't have control over much of our lives, right? We have control over our reactions to things, but the circumstances are not in our control. And I think that is such a strong inclination that we as human beings want to fix things, to concretize things, to control things. And play is the opposite of that. So, in yoga practice, that we are encountered. In fact, the practice takes us into the fact of impermanence. It puts us right up against it, and we observe it on a very intimate level. So, if there is a way to learn to observe that, to observe it in our body, and yet to be able to dance with that in some way, so that we can relax with that, then I think, at least for me anyway, I'm less inclined to have to put things in a box, define it, put it on the shelf. I can just keep revisiting it without having it have it be the same every time. Like, be okay with not knowing, be okay with change, which is really challenging.
Well, and also probably what could happen, and I know it has been my experience, that perhaps, coming back to the mat and having that constant reminder that at least, even if there's darkness in other areas of our lives,
Yeah.
coming back to the mat, at least we experience one moment, a taste of joy or of lightheartedness, that perhaps that we can start seeing at least the difference, because it just seems like there are teachers out there, there are people out there that are just not joyful at all. And I almost dare to say that you've always been joyful, and that wasn't anything that the yoga gave you, or did it?
Well, I haven't always been joyful. But there's our perspective of ourselves, and there's the perspective that others have of us. So I would probably that would be an interesting thing, is to ask people, right, your friends, about, you could ask them about you, the ones that have known you a long time. Mm-hmm. But I do feel that yoga practice has, it has served me in innumerable ways, and it's changed me for sure, because we all have our ways of dealing with things, and I had a very vivid experience with my dad when my father was dying in the hospital. I was fortunate enough to be able to get to him before he died. He'd had a traumatic brain injury and was in the intensive care unit, and was not able to speak, but was alert, had woken up by the time my husband and I had gotten there. And I had been practicing about 3-4 years ago, so I've been practicing yoga for a long time. And I remember standing, it was a few days of being there, and we kind of knew what was happening, but just standing by his bed. And, yoga teaches us to observe ourselves, right? To our breath, to feel our body, to be connected to what's happening in ourselves, because that's how we understand this condition and can then better communicate to others. If we're feeling unsteady, then we know that, we acknowledge that. So we don't have to change it, but at least we acknowledge it. We know, okay, maybe this is not the time to say that thing. Okay, but I remember looking at my dad, and he was alert, and he was looking at me and communicating through his eyes, and the TV was on, like they have in the hospital rooms, and I remember there was some space, something, NASA was doing something at the time, and my dad was also, was an engineer, and so I'm like, Dad, look, I'm trying to distract him, and then some part of my awareness knew that what that was, that I was not comfortable with with that present moment. I wasn't comfortable with the circumstances as they were. And I felt my feet on the ground, and they didn't quite feel on the ground, but I remember just being like, okay, you're gonna stand here, and you're gonna look at him, and you're not going to go away. You're not gonna go away. And there was a back and forth, and I don't think it was my imagination, but I really feel like he, I know in my heart I told him that he could go, that, I wanted him to know that he could go. And he was as clear and as like my father never looked at me like that. Do you know? He never really just took me in, and I don't think I ever really took him in either. And so
you almost didn't.
And I almost didn't. And I know it was Tadasana, I swear. I mean, I feel that it was Tadasana because I had, the repetition of the practice was like, go to the ground. Where are you connected to your foundation? And what's happening with your breath? And what's happening with your senses of perception? So my senses were trying to go. My feet were not grounding, And so it was, but the practice had given me enough awareness to be aware of that and to be able to say, okay, that's how things are, but I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stand in my discomfort because this moment I need to be present to. And I am, if yoga, if I, never do whatever pose, and it doesn't matter that the practice, the one of the biggest gifts I could ever have received, I've already received. So, and that, so I guess the lightness is maybe comes a bit from. Like that was a really, what could be, I guess one could look at, in somebody's intensive care and the tubes are down their mouth and they're having trouble breathing. There was beauty in that moment, huge beauty. And even after he died, and I was looking at his body, and my mom and I did that, and it was, I really felt that it would, that this was a beautiful thing to see another human being just as they are.
Taking in each moment as
it is,
without
and
judging or trying to run away from it.
Yeah. And so that yoga, I don't know that I would have been able to have stayed steady when, everything in me wanted to get out of the room.
So that really comes back to having that repetitive practice.
Yes.
You never know when you're going to need it.
That's right, because we practice, like Patanjali says, over a long period of time without interruption. So we do this every day. The stakes are lower, like what we worked on today. And we're observing ourselves, and then the yoga pose might be harder, so the stakes feel a little higher, in that realm. But it's not, maybe there's some emotion. It's not quite as intense, I think, as as it might be like your relationship with your spouse or with your parent or your child. But it's really about the deeper learning. So the pose, we do the pose, but it's really about the pose. The pose is Tadasana, or the pose is another context, Shavasana.
Going back to the beginning, it seems to me also that one of the things that in this Iyengar system is that we are continuously going back to Tadasana, and it always, we begin in Tadasana, but we never leave Tadasana because it's a constant, always coming back to the beginning. And as beginners, we're taught, perhaps it could be looked at in a rigid way where it's repetitive practice. It's to build the strength and the flexibility and the concentration so that one can really pay attention. But it comes a point where the practice starts becoming a little bit different. As the painter Picasso says, that you have to master the rules in order to break them.
Yes.
You're one of the biggest rule breaker, aren't you?
Well, the thing I like, rules are great. Rules are great because, Mary Oliver, another artist, but then the language realm, she wrote a book called The Rules of the Dance. And so it's like any good game or whatever, structure can create freedom. Structure can create freedom. But I feel like if we so rigidly adhere always to structure, like this is just for myself anyway, sometimes I mistake the form for the content, or as I think it was Reverend Carrera said, do you know who wrote that Yoga Sutra book? One time at Omega we were in a dialogue and he said, well, we have to be careful not to mistake the cup for the elixir. And that really stuck with me because it reminded me of a verse in the Bhagavad Gita when Krishna's telling Arjuna not to get caught up in the cup. He's like, but what about the tea, you know? And so the form is there because it helps provide a context for freedom. It's not just anything goes, do you know? It actually challenges us to go deeper in a certain way.
Dancers have rules.
It's, well...
You have to start somewhere.
You know, it's like, it goes to this, we worked with it a little bit earlier. It's not can I or can't I, but if there's that how can I do this? Okay, there's this circumstance. I'm in this body, I'm this age, you know, I have this history, whatever. There's certain givens.
These dimensions.
Yeah, that's right, these dimensions. That could be a limitation. I could say to myself, I can't do such and such because I'm, you know, have my torso short, my blah, blah, whatever. No, it's how can I? That means that the form might have to change in some way. Do you know what I'm saying? Like like if I have such a fixed idea of what a certain pose is, and I'm not able to get under, well, what is the essence of this pose? Mm-hmm. And essence is mysterious because we see there's something, it's like space. I mean, we see space because of objects being in space, right? It's hard to see space without stuff, or stuff without space. But the, you know, the essence of a pose is not something we can actually hold. Mm-hmm. The pose holds the essence. But the essence, which could be emptiness, I don't know, you know, but there are poses like you think Warrior One, that has a certain something, doesn't it, for you when you think of Warrior One? You know, so if you're doing Warrior One and you're so caught up in some aspect of the alignment that you feel disempowered, weak, you know, or just bad about your body or whatever, you know, then we're missing something. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean completely throw out the form. Don't do Warrior One. Do something else that makes you feel powerful. It's not that either. It's like, how can I embody this form in a way that there is a connection or a communing or a coming together of this form and some essence that we might discover by embodying the form, but a pose like where it has a name, Virabhadrasana. So, can't forget that. Yeah, so I think that's, so with regards to clinging to the rules as if they were the thing itself, then for me anyway, that's missing, you know, and I think it's just good to question things. Like, you know, other people might not have that, and not out of disrespect or anything.
Carrie Iyengar did, and then he created a whole new system just by questioning.
Just staying curious and wondering why.
Figuring out how.
And wondering, mm-hmm. you know, making room for wonder. Mm-hmm. That's what scientists do, right? People think scientists are so limited. They're like, you know, there's all these generalizations that we make, which is unfortunate because we reduce people, we reduce system to our ideas about them, and we don't. We try to categorize. Yeah, I've done that. I think many of us have done that, and in other words, the vritti. So that's an idea, right? A thought. So vrittis, right? We say yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the cessation or the stilling of the consciousness, the wavy consciousness. But it's really interesting how vrittis depends on the nature of the vritti, but they can limit us. Mm-hmm. You know, we have these limiting vrittis.
Well, and Patanjali says it could be painful or non-painful.
Yeah, and so I guess it's how do you use the rules, and also, you know, for me, it's like a container, and I just and things change, you know. I mean, you know, you look at our own country, you know, and how much change we've witnessed. Even you and I have, when I'm older than you, but that we've witnessed, you know, never mind our parents, and how much big, serious rules, you know, people of the same sex getting married. I mean, this is big change, and there are many, many, many others. We'll just use that as an example. That's something that was very disturbing idea.
At one point, women couldn't vote.
That's right. Yes.
So that's part of our evolution, is really continuing to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, namaste. And I know it was Tadasana, I swear. I mean, I feel that it was Tadasana, because I had, you know, the repetition of the practice was like, go to the ground. Where are you connected to your foundation, and what's happening with your breath, and what's happening with your senses of perception? So my senses were trying to go. My feet were not grounding, you know? And so it was, but the practice had given me enough awareness to be aware of that, and to be able to say, you know, okay, that's how things are, but I'm gonna stay here. I'm gonna stand in my discomfort, because this moment I need to be present to.